A family's dream vacation to the sun-drenched coasts of Italy concludes not with fond memories, but with the cold, sterile click of handcuffs in a crowded airport terminal. 14-year-old Leo Sterling, an honor student with a passion for art, is accused of theft. The accuser, an airline security officer named Frank Miller. The charge, stealing a suitcase he insists is his own. As his world shrinks to the space of a small grey interrogation room, his parents watch their shock hardening into a resolve that will shake an entire corporation to its core. Because the Sterlings aren't just any family. They are a legal dynasty, and they just found their next case. The air in Rome's Fiumicino airport was thick with the bittersweet cocktail of travel, the lingering aroma of espresso, the faint tang of jet fuel, and the palpable hum of 1,000 hurried goodbyes. For the Sterling family, it was the final punctuation mark on 2 weeks of idyllic bliss. They had walked the Colosseum, tossed coins into the Trevi fountain, and eaten enough gelato to last a lifetime. Marcus Sterling, a man whose courtroom presence was legendary for its calm, imposing stillness, was presently trying to juggle 3 passports and a half-eaten panini. He was the senior partner at Sterling & Hayes, a prestigious Chicago law firm built by his father. His movements were always deliberate, economical, as if he were constantly conserving energy for a closing argument. His wife, Dr. Annalise Sterling, was the firm's other pillar. Where Marcus was the unshakable oak, Annalise was the wildfire. With a PhD in sociology alongside her law degree, she specialized in civil rights litigation. She saw the world not just in legal statutes, but in the intricate, often unjust systems that governed people's lives. Right now, her focus was on their son Leo ruffling his hair as he sketched furiously in his notepad. "Let me see Michelangelo," she said, her voice warm. Leo, at 14, was in that awkward, beautiful phase between boy and man. He had his mother's bright, intelligent eyes and his father's pensive brow. His current masterpiece was a detailed rendering of the Pantheon, shaded with a single ballpoint pen. He was a quiet observer, a kid who processed the world through lines and shadows, rather than words. "It's not done," he mumbled a familiar refrain. "It's wonderful," Marcus said, peering over his shoulder. "Maybe leave some ancient monuments for the rest of the tourists to see, son." The announcement for Global Wings Airlines Flight 815 to Chicago O'Hare crackled over the intercom, and the familiar rhythm of departure took over. They navigated security, bought overpriced water, and finally settled into their business-class seats. The 14-hour flight was a comfortable blur of movies, naps, and mediocre airline food. They landed at O'Hare International Airport, exhausted, but happy. The grey, businesslike sky of Chicago was a stark contrast to the cerulean blue of Italy, but it was home. "Okay. Operation Luggage Retrieval is a go," Annalise announced with mock seriousness. "Leo, you're on lookout. Marcus, you're on muscle. I'll be the strategic commander." They joined the throng around baggage claim Carousel 7. It was a universal scene of weary travelers, their vacation glow fading under the harsh fluorescent lights. Bags began to tumble onto the belt, a chaotic parade of black, blue, and grey rectangles. "There's mine," Annalise said, pointing to a distinctive crimson suitcase. Marcus, with the effortless strength of a man who frequented the gym before sunrise, plucked it from the carousel. A few minutes later, 2 identical standard-issue black hard-shell suitcases rolled into view one after the other. They were the same brand, the same model, the same size. One had a small, faded yellow ribbon tied to the handle, their family's identifier. The other was plain. Got them, Leo said, his voice lifting with the relief of a journey's end. He was closest to the carousel. He grabbed the one with the yellow ribbon first, then reached for the second identical bag right behind it. He pulled them both off the belt and set them by his feet, his father's and his own. He had just straightened up when a thick, meaty hand clamped down on his shoulder. Not so fast, son. Leo froze. The voice was low and gravelly, laced with an authority that felt like sandpaper. He turned to see a man in a navy blue security uniform. He was stout, with a florid face and small, suspicious eyes that seemed to take in Leo's designer hoodie and expensive sneakers with a sneer. The man's name tag read F. Miller. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice dropping a few degrees. He took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of his son. Frank Miller ignored Marcus. His eyes were locked on Leo. "Think you can just grab any bag you want? Saw you take that a second one. It doesn't have a ribbon." Leo's heart began to pound. It's my dad's bag. We have two that look the same. Mine has the ribbon, his doesn't." "Is that so?" Miller's tone was dripping with disbelief. "Let's see some ID and a baggage claim ticket for that second bag." Marcus stepped fully in front of Leo now. "My son has explained the situation. They are our bags. I have the claim checks right here." He began reaching into his coat pocket. "Sir, I'm talking to him," Miller said, gesturing at Leo with his chin. "I want to hear it from him. Kids these days think they can get away with anything." Annalise moved to Marcus's side. Her smile was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. "Officer, my husband has the claim checks. This is a simple misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." A shrill voice cut through the air. A woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair and a face pinched with anxiety, was rushing toward them. "That's my bag." "He took my bag." "Thief." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Leo. The word thief echoed in the cavernous space. Heads turned. The low hum of the baggage claim area seemed to quiet, replaced by a tense, focused silence. Leo felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, hot and accusatory. His face flushed with a deep, burning shame. He wanted to evaporate. Frank Miller puffed out his chest, vindicated. "See? Told you. Let's go, kid. We're going to have a little chat." He grabbed Leo's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Take your hands off my son." Marcus's voice was no longer calm. It was a low, dangerous growl. The courtroom stillness was gone, replaced by the fury of a father protecting his child. "Are you obstructing a security investigation?" "Sir," Miller retorted, his hand tightening on Leo's arm. Two more security guards began to walk toward them, drawn by the commotion. "This isn't an investigation. It's a public harassment," Annalise snapped. She turned to the frantic woman. "Ma'am, I assure you it's a mistake. Our bags are identical." He snatched it. "I saw him." The woman whose name they would later learn was Eleanor. Vance insisted. "My God, you people are all the same, so aggressive. The phrase you people hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a coded dart, and it hit its mark." Annalise's eyes narrowed to slits. The situation had just crossed a line from a misunderstanding to something far uglier. "All right, that's enough," Miller said, pulling a pair of zip-tie cuffs from his belt. "We're taking him in." "You will do no such thing," Marcus boomed. He pulled out his wallet, not for the claim checks, but for his business card. He held it up to Miller's face. "My name is Marcus Sterling. I am the senior partner at Sterling and Hayes." This is my wife, Dr. Annalise Sterling, our firm's leading civil rights attorney. You are currently assaulting and illegally detaining our minor son based on a hysterical accusation and your own blatant prejudice. I advise you in the strongest possible terms to unhand him immediately." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Frank Miller's face. He glanced at the card, then back at the impeccably dressed, powerfully spoken man in front of him. But the seed of suspicion was planted too deep. He saw a black family, a kid in a hoodie, and a stolen bag. His mind filled in the rest of the story he wanted to believe. "Lawyer, huh?" Miller scoffed, recovering his bravado. "You can tell it to the airport police. Let's go." He yanked Leo forward. The boy stumbled his sketchbook, falling from his grasp and skittering across the grimy floor pages, fluttering open to reveal the wonders of Rome. The sight of his son being physically dragged away like a criminal broke something in Marcus. The lawyer receded, and the father took over completely. He lunged forward, not at Miller, but to place himself between the guard and his son. The other two guards intercepted him, holding him back. "Sir, calm down." It was chaos. Leo was crying silently, tears of humiliation tracking paths through the grime on his face. Annalise was shouting legal statutes and threats of lawsuits. Marcus was struggling against the guards, his face a mask of controlled rage. Eleanor Vance was clutching her chest, playing the victim. A supervisor, a harried-looking woman named Brenda Walsh, finally arrived. She took one look at the scene, a hysterical white woman, a belligerent black family, and her security guard holding a crying black teenager, and made a swift, disastrous calculation. "What's going on here, Frank? This kid stole the lady's bag. The father's getting violent." "We have the claim, check," Annalise yelled, holding up the small paper receipt. "The number matches the tag on the bag." Brenda Walsh barely glanced at it. She was in de-escalation mode, which to her meant siding with her employee and removing the problem from the public eye. "Take them to the security office, all of them," she commanded. "And somebody get this woman her bag." One of the other guards handed the disputed black suitcase to a grateful Eleanor Vance, who clutched it like a holy relic and scurried away without a second glance. She didn't check the contents. She didn't wait to see what happened to the boy she had just accused. She just wanted her bag. And she was gone. The Sterling family was escorted through a series of sterile corridors to a small, windowless room. The door closed behind them, and the vibrant memories of Italy felt like they belonged to another lifetime. In their place was the cold, harsh reality of a grey room in O'Hare Airport, where their son, their brilliant, gentle son, was being treated like a common thief. The vacation was over. The war was just beginning. The flight back to their Lincoln Park brownstone was cloaked in a heavy, suffocating silence. The usual post-vacation chatter, the playful arguments over the best pasta or the funniest moment was absent. Marcus stared out the window of the chauffeured car, the Chicago skyline a blur of indifferent lights. Annalise sat in the middle, her hand resting on Leo's knee. But he was unreachable, lost in a world of his own. Leo went straight to his room and closed the door. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to be comforted. The humiliation was a physical entity, a venom that had seeped into his bones. The image of Frank Miller's sneering face, the sound of Eleanor Vance's shriek of "thief," the feeling of dozens of eyes branding him, it all played on a sickening loop in his mind. Downstairs in the grand book-lined study that served as their home office, the silence finally broke. "I'm going to end him," Annalise, said her voice, dangerously quiet. She was pacing her movements, sharp and agitated, a caged panther. Frank Miller, Brenda Walsh, Global Wings Airlines. I'm going to sue them into the Stone Age. I will own that airline and turn their corporate headquarters into a public library. Marcus hadn't moved from the large leather armchair behind his mahogany desk. He was staring at his hands, turning his wedding band over and over. It's not just about them, Annalise. What do you mean it's not about them? They put their hands on our son. They handcuffed him. They called him a thief in front of the entire world. I mean, their actions are a symptom. He clarified, his voice heavy. This isn't about one racist guard and one incompetent manager. This is about a system, a corporation that allows a man like Frank Miller to wield power, a culture that trains a woman like Brenda Walsh to see a black family as the aggressor by default. He finally looked up, and the weariness in his eyes was profound. They didn't look at the evidence. They didn't look at the claim check you were waving in their face. They looked at our son at us, and their minds were already made up. The lawsuit can't just be punitive, it has to be transformative. This was how they worked. Annalise's fire and Marcus's focus. She brought the righteous fury. He shaped it into an unbreakable legal strategy. So what's the play? She asked her, pacing slowing as her mind shifted from mother to lawyer. We don't go for a quick settlement, Marcus said, leaning forward. They'll offer one. A nuisance payout. $50, maybe $100,000 with a non-disclosure agreement. They'll want this to go away quietly. We refuse. He stood up and walked to the large whiteboard where they often mapped out complex cases. He uncapped a black marker. Our cause of action is multifaceted. He began his handwriting a neat, forceful script. 1. Racial discrimination, citing the Civil Rights Act. The disparate treatment of Leo compared to how a white teenager would have been handled. Eleanor Vance's "You People" comment is key witness testimony to the racially charged atmosphere. 2. Defamation. The public accusation of theft, slander per se. 3. False imprisonment, forcibly detaining Leo without probable cause. 4. Assault and battery. Frank Miller's physical handling of our son. 5. Negligent hiring. Training and supervision. This is the big one. This is how we go after the corporation. We argue that Global Wings Airlines knew or should have known about Frank Miller's unsuitability and failed to train its staff like Brenda Walsh in proper, unbiased conflict resolution. 6. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. The public humiliation, the trauma inflicted on a minor. To prove negligent supervision. Annalise added, picking up a red marker. We need discovery. We need Miller's personnel file, every complaint ever filed against him. We need their training manuals, their diversity and inclusion policies or lack thereof. Exactly. Marcus nodded. They will fight us tooth and nail on that. They'll claim it's confidential. That's when we file a motion to compel. We'll make it clear to the judge that their corporate culture is at the very heart of this case. The next morning, the firm of Sterling and Hayes was a hive of activity. Marcus and Annalise convened a meeting with their top litigators and their best junior associate, a brilliant and hungry young lawyer named David Chen. David, who had graduated top of his class from Harvard, law, idolized the Sterlings. He watched, captivated, as they laid out the case. There was no grief or parental anger in their presentation now. It was pure, distilled legal brilliance. Global Wings' initial defense will be twofold, Marcus explained to the team. First, the shopkeeper's privilege, arguing their security was within its rights to detain someone they reasonably suspected of theft. Second, they'll claim Miller and Walsh were acting outside the scope of their employment, trying to isolate the blame to two bad apple employees, and we counter Annalise took over by proving the suspicion was not reasonable, it was racial. And we prove the bad apples only grow in a rotten orchard. David. I want you to start drafting discovery requests. Be exhaustive. Ask for everything. Emails, text messages, internal memos, security rosters, training videos, complaint logs. For O'Hare, personnel, for the last 10 years. 10 years? David asked, his eyes wide. 10 years, Annalise confirmed. We're looking for a pattern. I guarantee you Frank Miller did not become a bigot on the day we landed. As predicted, within a week of filing the initial complaint, a letter arrived from Global Wings Airline's legal department. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology, expressing regret for any inconvenience the Sterling family may have experienced. It was followed by a phone call from their chief counsel, a slick lawyer named Richard Davenport. The call was patched through to the speaker in Marcus's office, with Annalise and David listening in. Marcus, good to speak with you, though. I wish it were under better circumstances. Davenport began, his tone oozing disingenuous sympathy. Look, we've reviewed the incident report. Clearly there were some procedural missteps, a classic case of overzealous security. On behalf of Global Wings, we're prepared to offer your family $50,000 to compensate for the unpleasantness and to put this matter behind us. Marcus was silent for a moment. Richard, let me be clear. You seem to be under the impression that this is about unpleasantness. My 14-year-old son was profiled, assaulted, and accused of a crime in public by one of your employees, while another one of your managers enabled it. $50,000 is not a settlement. It's an insult. Now, Marcus, let's be reasonable. No, you be reasonable. Richard Annalise's voice cut in sharp as broken glass. We have your offer. You will have our response in the form of a press release and a motion for expedited discovery. We're not seeking to be compensated for unpleasantness. We are seeking 8 figures in damages and a court-mandated overhaul of your security protocols nationwide. Have a nice day. She hung up the phone. David Chen looked from Annalise to Marcus, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He had handled contract disputes and intellectual property claims. This was different. This was war. They think it's about money, Marcus said, a grim smile touching his lips. They have no idea what's coming. But upstairs in his room, Leo Sterling wasn't thinking about lawsuits or discovery. He had taken his sketchbook filled with the beautiful drawings of Rome and hidden it in the back of his closet. He couldn't bear to look at it. The pen that had captured the majesty of the Pantheon now felt tainted, a reminder of the moment his world had been turned upside down. The joy of his art was gone, replaced by a cool hollow ache. And no amount of money could ever fix that. The discovery phase of a lawsuit is not a single dramatic event, but a slow, grinding war of attrition. It's a battle fought with paper, with motions and counter-motions, with terabytes of data and endless hours of tedious review. For Global Wings Airlines, the goal was to drown Sterling. Sterling and Hayes in a sea of irrelevant documents, while stonewalling on the crucial ones. For the Sterlings, the goal was to find the one thread that, when pulled, would unravel the entire corporate defense. David Chen found himself at the center of this maelstrom. He spent weeks sifting through thousands of pages of Global Wings training manuals. They were a monument to corporate doublespeak, full of cheerful acronyms like SEMILE, sincerely make individuals feel esteemed, and sections on cultural sensitivity that were so vague as to be meaningless. "It's all boilerplate, Annalise," he said, in a late-night strategy session, rubbing his tired eyes. "There's nothing here. It's designed to look good on paper, to provide plausible deniability." "Of course it is," Annalise replied, not looking up from a deposition summary. "The real training isn't in the manual, it's in the culture. Keep digging. Look for what's not there." "Is there any specific training on implicit bias?" "On de-escalation with minority customers." Any case studies there weren't. It was a glaring omission. Meanwhile, Marcus was preparing for the depositions. He decided Annalise would question Frank Miller. Her personal investment, which would be a liability in front of a jury, would be a powerful weapon in a deposition room designed to provoke and unnerve. He, Marcus, would handle the manager, Brenda Walsh, applying calm, relentless pressure to expose her corporate negligence. The first deposition was with Frank Miller. He swaggered into the conference room at the Sterling and Hayes offices, accompanied by a junior lawyer from Global Wings' firm. Miller had been prepped to be calm, polite, and stick to his story. He lasted 10 minutes. Annalise began calmly. She had him walk her through his career, his training, the events of that day at O'Hare. Miller answered in short, clipped sentences, his eyes fixed on his lawyer. "Mr. Miller," Annalise said, her tone shifting slightly. "You stated that you saw my son Leo snatch the second bag. Can you describe what you mean by snatch?" He grabbed it fast, looked guilty. He's a 14-year-old boy at the end of a long international flight. Could he have just been tired and eager to go home? "Looked shifty to me," Miller mumbled. "What about him looked shifty?" Annalise pressed. "Was it his posture, the way he was dressed?" "He was wearing a hoodie." "Do you find hoodies to be shifty?" "Sometimes." Miller grunted. The junior lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "And what about the hundreds of other people at that baggage claim? Did you observe any of them? A white teenager in a hoodie, for instance. Would you have found him equally shifty?" "Objection," the airline's lawyer piped up. "Speculative. It goes to the witness's state of mind." Counselor Annalise shot back, not taking her eyes off Miller. "Let me rephrase. In your 20 years as a security officer, Mr. Miller, how many white teenagers have you detained for suspected luggage?" "Theft." Miller's face began to turn a familiar shade of red. "I don't keep a scorecard." "We do," Annalise said coolly. David Chen slid a file across the table. "We subpoenaed the airport police records for O'Hare security-initiated detentions. In the last 5 years, you personally have initiated 87 such detentions. 81 of those individuals were black or Latino. Only 6 were white. Can you explain that discrepancy, I call it, like I see it?" Miller snarled. "And what do you see, Mr. Miller?" Annalise leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When you look at my son, what do you see? A child? An honor student? An artist? Or do you just see a black kid in a hoodie who couldn't possibly belong in business class, who couldn't possibly own 2 expensive suitcases? Objection. You're harassing the witness." "I'm just getting started," Annalise said, her eyes boring into Miller. "Let's talk about the complaint filed against you in 2022 by a Mr. Jamal Davis. He alleges you accused him of using a counterfeit ticket at a security checkpoint. The ticket was real, or the 2020 incident with Dr. Elara Vance. No relation to Eleanor Vance. I checked a black surgeon you accused of being intoxicated because she was stumbling. She was having a diabetic episode. You refused to let her get her medication. Do you remember that, Mr. Miller? Do you remember threatening a doctor who was trying to save her own life? Frank Miller exploded. They were all liars, making things up to get something for free. It's always the same with them, always playing the victim, always looking for a handout. The room fell silent. Miller had done it. He had taken all of Annalise's bait and articulated his bigotry on the record under oath. The junior lawyer from Global Wings looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Annalise sat back in her chair, a grimly satisfied look on her face. No further questions, she said. The deposition of the manager, Brenda Walsh, was a different affair. Marcus was methodical, almost surgical. He wasn't looking for an outburst. He was looking for the cracks in the corporate wall. Ms. Walsh-Marcus began his tone gentle. You described the situation at the baggage claim as chaotic. Is that correct? Yes, very, she said, relieved by his calm demeanor. And in a chaotic situation, your training dictates that your first priority is de-escalation. Yes, of course. So when my wife, a lawyer, presented you with a baggage claim ticket and told you the number matched the bag, why did you not pause the situation and verify that claim? Brenda hesitated. Things were moving very fast. There was a lot of yelling. But a claim check is a simple piece of evidence, is it not? A number on a piece of paper, a number on a bag tag. It takes 5 seconds to check. Why did you not perform that basic 5-second verification? Officer Miller had control of the situation. I trusted his judgment. You trusted his judgment, Marcus repeated slowly. Even though he was escalating the situation, not de-escalating it. Even though he had his hands on a minor. You chose to trust his judgment over a piece of physical evidence being presented to you by the boy's mother. It's our policy to back our security personnel. Ah, policy, Marcus said, seizing the word. So it is Global Wings Airline's policy to ignore evidence in favor of a security officer's judgment, even when that judgment appears to be inflaming a situation. No, that's not what I meant. Then please clarify for the record. Ms. Walsh, what did you mean? Because from where I stand, it appears your policy is to trust the biased assumptions of your employee over factual evidence. And that sounds less like a policy and more like a recipe for a civil rights lawsuit. Brenda crumbled not with anger, but with panicked bureaucratic backpedaling. She contradicted herself multiple times, admitting she never saw the claim check, that she didn't know the policy for verifying tags, and that she deferred to Miller simply because he was the man on the scene. She was the embodiment of corporate indifference, and Marcus had pinned her to the wall with it. The final piece of the puzzle was the CCTV footage. It would show everything: Leo calmly taking the bags, Miller's aggressive approach, Annalise trying to show the claim check, the public humiliation. It was the objective, silent witness. After weeks of delay, the airline's lawyers finally responded to the subpoena for the footage from Carousel 7. Their response was a single, devastating sentence. Due to a localized server malfunction on the date in question, the requested video footage is corrupted and irretrievable. Annalise slammed her fist on the conference table. Corrupted malfunction. Unbelievable, they wiped it. They deliberately destroyed evidence. Prove it, Marcus said grimly. They'll have a dozen IT reports, swearing it was a 1 in a million glitch. It was a major blow. Without the video, it was their word against Miller's and Walsh's. But David Chen, the tireless junior associate, had an idea. The woman, he said, looking up from his laptop. The accuser. Eleanor Vance. We haven't deposed her yet. She scurried away, but she was a primary party to the incident. Her testimony is crucial. Finding her was easy enough. Getting her to talk was harder. Her lawyer was stonewalling, claiming she was a mere bystander. But the Sterling's firm filed a motion to compel her testimony, and the judge agreed. Eleanor Vance would have to speak. 2 weeks later, she sat in the same deposition room, looking far less frantic and far more annoyed. Annalise conducted the questioning. Mrs. Vance, you stated very loudly and very publicly that my son was a thief. Why did you believe that? Well, he took my bag, she said, primly. How did you know it was your bag? It was a black hard-shell suitcase, just like mine. Were there any distinguishing marks on your bag? Mrs. Vance, a ribbon. A sticker. No. I don't believe in putting gaudy things on my luggage. I see. So in an airport baggage claim, filled with hundreds of identical black suitcases, you saw a boy pick one up, and you immediately concluded it was yours and that he was stealing it. You didn't consider for a moment that he might have an identical bag. The way he grabbed it, and he was with, well, he just didn't look like he belonged in the priority luggage area. There it was again. The coded language. Annalise let it hang in the air for a moment before moving on. You seemed very distressed, Mrs. Vance. Was there something particularly valuable in the suitcase? Eleanor Vance stiffened. Personal effects. Anything of high monetary value. Jewels, cash. No, nothing like that. So what was it? What was in that bag that made you so hysterical you were willing to scream "thief" at a child you'd never met? Annalise's voice was like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and cutting. Eleanor Vance squirmed. It was my husband's medical file. He has a very serious condition. All his records for a specialist in Chicago were in there. I was terrified of losing them. Annalise paused. This was unexpected. A sympathetic reason. But something felt off. So when you got the bag back, you must have been incredibly relieved. You opened it right there to make sure the files were safe. I imagine. No, Eleanor said quickly. I was flustered. I just wanted to get away from all the yelling. I took the bag and went home. This was the thread. The one Annalise had been looking for. You were terrified of losing your husband's life or death medical records, but you didn't check to make sure you had them. You didn't even peek inside the bag that a security guard had just handed you. I told you I was upset. Mrs. Vance, Annalise said, her voice dropping low. When did you realize you had the wrong bag? Eleanor. Vance's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do, Annalise said, standing up and walking around the table to stand directly behind her. You got home? You opened the suitcase, and you didn't find your husband's medical files. You found my son's sketchbook and my husband's clothes. You realized you were the one who had made the mistake. You had our bag, and we presumably had yours. But you didn't call the airline. You didn't call the airport. You said nothing. You let a child and his family go through this hell, all to cover up your own careless mistake. Isn't that the truth? Mrs. Vance? Eleanor. Vance was silent. She stared at the polished surface of the table, her reflection looking back at her, twisted and small. Isn't it? Annalise repeated. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Yes." The thread had been pulled. The entire story was beginning to unravel. But the ugliest truths were yet to be discovered. The admission from Eleanor Vance was a crack in the dam, but Annalise and Marcus knew it wasn't enough to cause a flood. A mistaken panicked accuser was one thing. Proving a corporate conspiracy was another. The corrupted CCTV footage remained the ghost in the machine, the key piece of evidence Global Wings had conveniently made disappear. "They won't just admit they wiped it," Marcus said, pacing his office late one night. The case had consumed them. Dinners were strategy sessions. Evenings were spent poring over documents. Davenport is too smart for that. He'll sacrifice Walsh and Miller as rogue employees. He'll paint Eleanor Vance as the catalyst. He'll isolate the airline from liability. "Then we have to find someone on the inside," Annalise countered. "Someone with a conscience, or someone with a grudge." This was David Chen's time to shine. While the partners focused on legal strategy, David, with his tech-savvy and relentless work ethic, went hunting in the digital world. He used legal databases and social media to search for any disgruntled ex-employees from Global Wings O'Hare IT or security departments. He sent out dozens of carefully worded confidential inquiries. Most went unanswered. A few resulted in angry rejections, but one hit. The email was from a man named Ben Carter. He was a former IT server administrator at O'Hare, laid off 3 months prior in a corporate restructuring. His message was brief. "I know about your case. I know about the footage. I'm not talking on email. Meet me." The meeting was set for a dingy sports bar near Midway Airport, far from the gleaming towers of downtown where lawyers conducted business. Ben Carter was a nervous man in his 40s, constantly glancing over his shoulder. He clutched his beer like a life raft. "They didn't lay me off because of restructuring." He began, his voice low. "They laid me off because I wouldn't play ball." I was the guy on duty when the request to preserve the footage from Carousel 7 came in. "The legal hold request from our firm," Annalise said, nodding for him to continue. "That's right," Ben said. "The request comes in, it generates a ticket. My job is to isolate that footage on the server, lock it, and create a backup. Standard procedure. I was about to do it when I got a call. Who was the call from?" "Marcus," asked, his voice steady, trying to keep the man calm. "Robert Maxwell," Ben said, and the name dropped like a stone. Robert Maxwell was not some low-level manager. He was the regional director of security for the entire Midwest. He was Brenda Walsh's boss's boss. He was very persuasive. Told me there was a sensitive HR issue involving the footage and that management was handling it internally. He told me to mark the ticket resolved and to stand down. "And did you?" Annalise asked, her heart beginning to pound. No, it smelled wrong. A legal hold is a legal hold. You don't ignore it. So I did my job. I made a copy of the footage. I put it on an encrypted external drive, just like I was supposed to. An hour later, Maxwell calls back, furious. He asks if I've secured the footage. I tell him yes. He tells me, and I quote, "That footage needs to have an accident, a server error. Make it happen." Ben took a long swallow of his beer. I refused. I told him that was illegal, that it was destruction of evidence. He told me I could be a team player, or I could be unemployed. The next day, my supervisor tells me my position has been eliminated. 2 days after that, I hear about a catastrophic server malfunction that just so happened to wipe out the footage from that day. They had another IT guy do it. Someone who was a team player. Annalise and Marcus exchanged a look. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Ben Marcus said carefully, "That external drive, the copy you made, do you still have it?" Ben. Carter reached into his worn messenger bag and pulled out a small black external hard drive. He slid it across the sticky table. "I figured it might be a good insurance policy," he said with a wry smile. "Make them pay." Back at the office, they watched the footage. It was exactly as they had imagined, but seeing it was a visceral blow. There was Leo looking young and happy, pulling the bags. There was Frank Miller, stalking toward him with predatory intent. There was the hand on the shoulder, the accusation Annalise desperately holding up the claim check for a dismissive Brenda Walsh to see. It showed the other guards manhandling Marcus. It showed Eleanor Vance, face contorted in a mask of ugly panic. And most damningly, it showed her walking away with the wrong suitcase, not even bothering to check it. It was irrefutable, and it proved that Global Wings Airlines, from a senior director down, had engaged in a criminal conspiracy to hide it. The next call to Richard Davenport was different. Richard Marcus began, his voice cold as ice. "We have a problem. A witness has come forward. A Mr. Ben Carter. Does that name ring a bell? He's provided us with a sworn affidavit, and he's also provided us with the corrupted and irretrievable CCTV footage." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the speakerphone. Furthermore, Marcus continued Mr. Carter's affidavit details, his conversation with your regional director of security, Robert Maxwell, in which Mr. Maxwell directly ordered him to destroy evidence subject to a legal hold. That's obstruction of justice, Richard. A federal crime. It moves this case from a simple civil matter into something far more serious. Your entire defense has just been perjured. Davenport finally found his voice, but it was strained. "What do you want Marcus a meeting?" Annalise said, taking over. "With you, with the CEO of Global Wings, and with Robert Maxwell in the room, in our office, tomorrow. And Richard, don't come here with another insulting offer. Come here ready to save what's left of your company." The meeting was a study in contrasts. The Sterlings. David Chen at their side were calm, powerful, in complete control. The Global Wings contingent was a wreck. The CEO, a man named Thomas Lancaster, looked ashen. Richard Davenport's usual slick confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic, hunted look. And Robert Maxwell, the security director, looked like a man who could see the bars of a jail cell forming around him. Annalise began by playing the video on the large screen in the conference room. No one spoke. The events unfolded in damning silence. When it was over, she turned to Maxwell. "Maxwell, in your sworn deposition, you stated you had no direct involvement or knowledge of this incident beyond reading the initial report. Was that statement true?" Maxwell stared at his hands. His lawyer muttered, "He will not be answering that." "I'm sure he won't," Annalise said, "because he would be committing perjury again." She then detailed Ben Carter's entire story. The phone calls, the threats, the cover-up. When she was finished, Marcus spoke. "Here is our position. This is no longer a negotiation about damages for our son. This is a surrender. We have you on racial discrimination, false imprisonment, defamation, negligent supervision, and now conspiracy and obstruction of justice. We will be turning this hard drive over to the U.S. Attorney's Office." The CEO, Thomas Lancaster, finally spoke, his voice hoarse. What will it take to make that not happen? It's not about money, Marcus said. Everything is about money. Lancaster shot back, a flash of his usual corporate arrogance showing through. Then you still don't get it, Marcus replied calmly. But you will. The Sterling's demands were laid out non-negotiable. 1. A settlement of $25 million. Not for them, but to be paid into a trust for Leo. A reminder of the value of his dignity, Annalise called it. 2. A public televised apology. Not a written statement, but the CEO, Thomas Lancaster, standing at a podium and personally apologizing to Leo Sterling by name. 3. The immediate termination of Frank Miller, Brenda Walsh, and Robert Maxwell. 4. A $10 million donation paid by Global Wings to a consortium of civil rights organizations dedicated to fighting racial profiling. 5. A complete court-supervised overhaul of their security training programs nationwide, designed and implemented by a third-party civil rights group of the Sterling's choosing. Davenport and Lancaster balked. The numbers were staggering. The public humiliation would be immense. Or Marcus said, we can hold a press conference this afternoon, release the video and the affidavit, and let the U.S. Attorney, the FAA, and the Court of Public Opinion decide the fate of your airline. Your stock price won't survive the day. Choose. They had no choice. It was checkmate. The hard karma was just beginning to fall. For Frank Miller, being fired was only the start. The publicity from the lawsuit brought other victims out of the woodwork. The civil rights groups, funded by the airline's own money, helped organize a class action lawsuit against him and Global Wings, citing a pattern of abuse. His life's work, built on a foundation of bigotry, crumbled into ruin. Brenda Walsh was fired for gross negligence. Blacklisted in the industry, she was unable to find another management position, her career destroyed by her choice to follow a toxic policy over basic human decency. Robert Maxwell was fired, and thanks to Ben Carter's testimony, indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for obstruction of justice. He traded his corner office for a criminal defense lawyer and the prospect of prison time. Eleanor Vance faced her own reckoning. The Sterling's lawsuit didn't name her, but the details of her false accusation became public. She was pilloried in the press and on social media, a living symbol of privileged panic and racial bias. The shame was its own kind of prison. The day Thomas Lancaster delivered his televised apology was a surreal moment. He stood stiffly at a podium, the Global Wings logo behind him, and looked into the camera. On behalf of our entire company, he began. His voice strained. I want to offer our deepest and most sincere apology to Mr. Leo Sterling. Watching from their living room, the Sterling family felt not triumph, but a profound, weary sense of justice. It was Leo who finally broke the silence. Can I have my sketchbook back now? He asked. The bag with his drawings, which Eleanor Vance had shamefully returned weeks ago, had been sitting in an evidence locker. Now it was just a suitcase again. Annalise retrieved it for him. He opened it, took out the sketchbook filled with his Roman drawings, and for the first time in months, he smiled. The shadow had lifted. Of course. Here is part 5. An expanded aftermath that bridges the climax and the conclusion detailing the long-term consequences for everyone involved. In the year that followed the settlement, the echoes of the confrontation at O'Hare baggage claim, 7 continued to reverberate, reshaping lives and fortunes in ways no one could have initially predicted. The televised apology was not an end, but a beginning. The first tremor of an earthquake whose aftershocks would be felt for a long time. For Leo Sterling, the world had been split into a before and an after. Before, he was a quiet artist, content to observe the world from a safe distance. After, he was the boy, whose dignity was priced at $25 million. For months, the trust fund his parents had established for him felt like a heavy weight, a constant reminder of the humiliation he had endured. He shied away from the news articles and the whispers at school. His sketchbook remained closed. The turning point came not from his parents, but from a message he received on social media. It was from a girl in California, another black teenager who had been falsely accused of shoplifting at a high-end department store. She wrote, "I saw your story. It made me feel like I wasn't crazy. It made me feel like I could fight back." That message unlocked something in Leo. He realized his story was no longer just his own. It had become a symbol for others. He finally reopened his sketchbook, but instead of Roman architecture, he began to draw faces. He drew Frank Miller's face contorted in a sneer of baseless suspicion. He drew Brenda Walsh's face a mask of indifferent bureaucracy. He drew Eleanor Vance's face pinched with privileged panic. And then he drew the face of the girl from California and others who sent him messages. Faces filled with a mixture of pain, frustration, and resilience. His art became his voice. He launched an online project called T-Tour. The Accused, a series of portraits and stories of young people of color who had been subjected to profiling. It went viral. He was invited to speak at his high school, then at a youth leadership conference. Standing at a podium with his art projected behind him, Leo was no longer the silent observer. They see a hoodie, not a heart. They see a threat, not a child. He said, his voice clear and steady. They want us to be afraid to be silent. But my story and all of our stories are proof that silence is a choice. We can choose to be defined by their prejudice, or we can choose to define ourselves by our response to it. The $25 million trust was no longer a weight, it was a tool. Under his parents' guidance, Leo used the interest from the fund to create grants for youth-led arts and advocacy projects, turning the instrument of his pain into a source of empowerment for thousands. The firm of Sterling and Hayes was transformed. While they continued their corporate litigation, they opened a new, heavily funded civil rights division led by Annalise. Their reputation, once known for being ruthlessly effective, was now legendary for being righteously so. They were inundated with requests, becoming the go-to firm for challenging systemic discrimination. Marcus and Annalise found a new shared purpose that went beyond building a successful business. They were now building a legacy of justice forged in the fire of their own family's trauma. Global Wings Airlines paid its price in more than just dollars. The court-mandated overhaul, overseen by a civil rights group chosen by the Sterlings, was grueling. The airline was forced to implement the Dignity First initiative, a comprehensive new training program focused on implicit bias, de-escalation, and cultural competency. Every single employee, from the CEO down to the baggage handlers, had to complete it. Their new internal affairs division, created as a condition of the settlement, investigated every single discrimination complaint with a level of scrutiny that made managers terrified of missteps. The stock price eventually recovered, but the brand was permanently scarred. For years, the name Global Wings Airlines would be synonymous with the scandal, a case study taught in business ethics classes on how not to handle a crisis. The karma for the individuals who caused the incident was direct and unforgiving. Frank Miller was a pariah. Fired and facing a class action lawsuit, his legal bills mounted. His union provided a lawyer, but couldn't protect him from the sheer weight of his documented history. Former colleagues shunned him. His name became a verb among airport employees. Don't pull a Miller. Stripped of his uniform and his perceived authority, he was just an angry, bitter man whose prejudices had cost him everything. Brenda Walsh discovered that the corporate ladder is slippery on the way down. No airline or major corporation would touch her. A Google search of her name brought up dozens of articles about her gross negligence and corporate indifference. She ended up taking a low-level administrative job in a different industry, a ghost of her former managerial self. A permanent reminder that just following policy is no defense when the policy is wrong. Robert Maxwell. The architect of the cover-up pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a fine that wiped out a significant portion of his savings. His federal conviction barred him from ever working in the security or aviation industries again. His fall from grace was total and complete. And Eleanor Vance, the woman who lit the match, faced a quieter, but no less profound reckoning. While she was never sued, her name became public record through the depositions. She was ostracized from her social circles, her reputation shattered. The deepest cut, however, came from within her own home. Her husband, whose grave medical condition she had used as a shield for her lie, was horrified. The trust between them was broken. Her hysterical, baseless accusation had not only ruined a boy's vacation, but had also poisoned the very relationship she claimed she was trying to protect. She was left in a prison of her own, making surrounded by a silence born of her own shouted lie. One evening, about 1.5 years after the incident, the Sterling family sat together in their study. On the wall was a framed copy of a newspaper article about Leo's advocacy project. Marcus looked at his son, who was sketching in his notepad, not with the frantic escape of the past, but with the calm confidence of an artist who knew his purpose. "You know," Marcus said quietly, "I've won bigger cases. Cases with more at stake financially. But I've never been prouder of a result than I am of this." Annalise put her arm around Leo's shoulders. "It wasn't a case we won in a courtroom. It was a battle we won in here," she said, tapping her heart. "We were hurt, and we used that hurt to heal others." Leo looked up from his drawing. It was a picture of a single, powerful oak tree with deep roots and branches reaching for the sky. It was a portrait of his family. "They tried to bury us," Leo said, adding a final decisive line to the drawing. "They didn't know we were seeds." This was never a story about a lost suitcase. It was a story about lost dignity and the fight to reclaim it. It was about how a single moment of prejudice can ignite a fire that exposes the rot within a powerful corporation. The Sterling family didn't just seek compensation, they demanded accountability. They proved that the law, when wielded with passion and precision, can be a powerful shield for the vulnerable and a formidable sword against injustice. Leo Sterling got more than a settlement. He got his voice back. Global wings. Airlines learned a lesson that cost them millions, but the real price was paid in the currency of public trust. Their story is a stark reminder that in our world, the fight against systemic bias is not won in a single grand battle, but in every instance where courage stands up to prejudice and says, "No, not today, not to my child, not on my watch." If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of holding institutions accountable, please hit the like button, share this video with others, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice and resilience. Your support helps us continue to bring these important narratives to light. Thank you for listening.